What if Zeus didn't descend from Olympus, but from another planet? The ancient Greeks believed their gods lived atop a mountain peak. Yet these deities could fly, hurled lightning bolts, created intelligent machines, and fought battles that resembled cosmic wars. What if all these tales are distorted memories of actual contact with extraterrestrial beings? Today we attempt to understand, were ancient myths hidden testimony to visits from other stars? In the marble halls of forgotten temples, where incense once burned for gods who walked among mortals, a question lingers in the shadows of history. The pantheon of ancient Greece, Zeus with his thunderbolts, Athena emerging fully formed from a divine skull, Hephaestus crafting golden automatons that moved and thought like living beings. These stories have been dismissed as primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena. Yet what if they represent something far more extraordinary? The ancient Greeks possessed no concept of space travel, no understanding of advanced technology, no vocabulary for describing vehicles that could traverse the heavens. When they witnessed the impossible, they could only describe it in terms their culture understood as the actions of gods. But strip away the mythological language, examine the underlying descriptions, and a startling pattern emerges. Beings of immense power descending from the sky, weapons that could level mountains, machines that possessed intelligence, genetic manipulation that created hybrid offspring, technologies that transformed matter itself. For millennia, these accounts have been relegated to the realm of fantasy. But in an age when we ourselves reach for the stars, when we manipulate genetic codes and create artificial intelligence, perhaps it is time to reconsider what the ancients were trying to tell us. The gods of Olympus may have been more than figments of human imagination. They may have been memories of an encounter that reshaped the course of human civilization. Historical context. The mythological framework of ancient Greece emerged from the mists of prehistory, crystallizing between the 10th and 8th centuries BCE into the complex narrative system that would define Western civilization's understanding of divine power and cosmic order. These were not mere entertainment or primitive attempts at natural philosophy, but sophisticated theological constructs that encoded the deepest beliefs and experiences of a civilization that saw itself as uniquely favored by supernatural forces. The earliest layers of Greek mythology can be traced to the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization around 1200 BCE, when the great palace centers fell silent and the linear script disappeared, taking with it the written records of a Bronze Age world. From this dark age emerged oral traditions that preserved fragments of older stories, weaving them into new narratives that would eventually become the foundation of classical mythology. The bards who sang these tales around flickering fires were not mere storytellers but custodians of cultural memory, preserving accounts that may have originated in events too extraordinary for literal recording. Hesiod's Theogony, composed in the 8th century BCE, provides our earliest systematic account of divine genealogy and cosmic origins. His description of the primordial chaos giving way to successive generations of gods bears striking resemblances to creation myths found across cultures worldwide, suggesting either common psychological archetypes or shared memories of actual events. The Titanomachy, the war between the Titans and the Olympian gods, reads like an account of cosmic-scale warfare involving weapons and forces beyond human comprehension. Homer's epics, the Iliad and Odyssey, present the gods as active participants in human affairs, possessing technologies and capabilities that seem to anticipate modern scientific achievements. The gods travel instantly across vast distances, communicate through divine networks, and wield weapons that can destroy armies with single strikes. Hephaestus crafts golden servants that possess intelligence and autonomous movement, while Athena provides Odysseus with technologies that allow him to disguise his appearance completely. The classical period saw the systematization of these mythological traditions into the familiar pantheon centered on Mount Olympus. The 12 Olympian gods each possessed distinct technological capabilities and spheres of influence that suggest specialized roles in some greater cosmic hierarchy. Zeus commanded atmospheric phenomena and energy projection. Poseidon controlled seismic and hydrological systems. Demeter managed agricultural and biological processes, while Athena specialized in strategic thinking and technological innovation. Archaeological evidence from the Archaic period reveals the enormous cultural importance placed on these divine figures. Temples rose across the Greek world, their architecture designed to accommodate rituals that supposedly enabled communication with the gods. The Parthenon, with its precise mathematical proportions and acoustic properties, may have been more than a religious structure. It may have been a technological interface designed to facilitate contact with non-human intelligences. The mystery religions that flourished alongside public worship provided initiates with secret knowledge about the gods' true nature and their relationship to humanity. The Eleusinian Mysteries, centered on Demeter and Persephone, promised revelation about death and rebirth that transformed participants' understanding of existence itself. The Orphic tradition spoke of cosmic cycles and the soul's journey through multiple incarnations, concepts that align remarkably with modern theories about consciousness and dimensional reality. Classical Greek philosophy emerged partly as an attempt to rationalize these mythological traditions, yet even the most sophisticated thinkers maintained belief in the gods' reality. Plato's dialogues reference divine inspiration and communication with supernatural intelligences, while Aristotle's metaphysics posits the existence of unmoved movers who direct cosmic processes. The Stoics developed elaborate theories about divine providence and the interconnectedness of all existence, suggesting that the gods operated according to natural laws rather than arbitrary whim. The Hellenistic period witnessed the expansion of Greek mythology throughout the Mediterranean world, where it encountered and synthesized with local traditions. This cultural fusion produced syncretic systems that preserved the essential characteristics of the Greek gods while adapting them to new contexts. The persistence of these mythological patterns across diverse cultures suggests that they encoded universal human experiences or memories of encounters that transcended local boundaries. Roman adoption of Greek mythology marked both its preservation and transformation. The Romans identified their native deities with Greek counterparts, creating a unified system that would dominate Western religious thought for centuries. Yet this process also began the gradual allegorization of mythological content, as literal belief in the gods' existence gave way to symbolic interpretation. The rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire fundamentally altered the relationship between mythology and reality. Christian theologians dismissed pagan gods as demons or illusions, effectively ending the direct religious tradition that had maintained living contact with these entities for over a millennium. Yet the mythological narratives survived in literary form, preserving their essential content while stripping away their claims to historical truth. The medieval period saw the complete transformation of Greek mythology from religious reality to literary heritage. The gods became characters in allegories and moral tales, their original context as descriptions of actual encounters lost beneath layers of Christian interpretation. Scholarly traditions preserved the texts while dismissing their literal content, creating a gap between the ancient understanding of these stories and their modern reception. The Renaissance revival of classical learning brought renewed interest in Greek mythology, but approached it primarily through aesthetic and philosophical lenses. Humanist scholars studied the myths as expressions of eternal human truths rather than potential historical records, establishing interpretive frameworks that would dominate academic discourse for centuries. This approach, while valuable for understanding the psychological and cultural dimensions of mythology, effectively closed off investigation into their possible basis in actual events. The Enlightenment further distanced modern consciousness from mythological thinking, establishing reason and empirical observation as the sole legitimate sources of knowledge about reality. The gods of Olympus were relegated to the realm of primitive superstition, their stories dismissed as evidence of humanity's pre-scientific worldview. This rationalist approach achieved enormous advances in understanding natural phenomena, yet it also created blind spots that may have obscured important aspects of human experience and historical memory. The modern era has witnessed periodic attempts to reconsider mythological traditions as potential sources of historical information. Archaeologists like Heinrich Schliemann demonstrated that Homeric narratives contained accurate geographical and cultural details, suggesting that mythological stories might preserve factual information beneath their supernatural veneer. This discovery opened new possibilities for understanding the relationship between mythology and history, yet mainstream scholarship has remained reluctant to extend this approach to the gods themselves. The emergence of space-age technology in the 20th century created new contexts for interpreting ancient mythological narratives. Suddenly, the gods' ability to travel through the heavens, their advanced weapons, and their sophisticated technologies no longer seemed impossible but merely premature. This technological perspective has generated alternative theories about the nature and origin of mythological traditions, theories that challenge fundamental assumptions about human history and our place in the cosmos. The mythological legacy of ancient Greece thus stands at a crossroads between scientific materialism and speculative possibility. These stories, which once provided the foundation for an entire civilization's understanding of reality, now exist in a liminal space between dismissed superstition and potential revelation. Their ultimate meaning may depend on our willingness to expand our conception of what is possible, to consider that the ancients may have been describing realities that our current paradigms cannot adequately explain. The fading of the gods. The twilight of the Greek gods began not with dramatic revelation but with the slow erosion of belief, as new ideologies and foreign influences gradually displaced the ancient certainties that had sustained Mediterranean civilization for over a millennium. The transformation was neither uniform nor complete, unfolding across centuries as the old gods retreated from public life while leaving traces of their presence embedded in the cultural memory of humanity. By the 3rd century CE, the Roman Empire had become a crucible of competing religious and philosophical systems. Christianity, with its promise of personal salvation and universal brotherhood, gained adherents among populations seeking meaning in an increasingly chaotic world. The mystery religions of the East offered alternative paths to spiritual fulfillment, while philosophical schools provided intellectual frameworks for understanding existence without recourse to traditional mythology. The gods of Olympus, once the undisputed masters of cosmic order, found themselves competing for relevance in a marketplace of ideas. The Christian critique of pagan mythology was particularly devastating to the gods' cultural authority. Church fathers like Augustine and Jerome systematically dismantled the theological foundations of Greek religion, arguing that the gods were either demons in disguise or mere human inventions designed to justify immoral behavior. This intellectual assault was accompanied by practical measures. Temples were closed, priestly orders disbanded, and sacred sites converted to Christian use. The ancient protocols for communicating with the gods were lost as the institutional structures that had preserved them for centuries collapsed. Yet the gods' retreat from public consciousness was not complete. Private worship continued in remote areas, particularly among rural populations who maintained traditional agricultural practices tied to seasonal cycles and natural phenomena. Archaeological evidence suggests that small shrines and household altars remained active well into the 6th century CE, indicating that belief in the gods' reality persisted despite official suppression. These hidden practices preserved fragments of the old knowledge, maintaining tenuous connections to divine presences that had once openly walked among mortals. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century CE accelerated the gods' disappearance from living memory. The barbarian invasions that swept across the Mediterranean world brought new peoples with different religious traditions, while the social upheaval destroyed the educational systems that had transmitted classical mythology. The great libraries of Alexandria and Constantinople, which had preserved thousands of texts describing divine encounters and mythological traditions, were scattered or destroyed, taking with them detailed records of humanity's relationship with the gods. The Byzantine Empire maintained Greek cultural traditions longer than the Latin West, but even there the gods became increasingly abstract and literary rather than immediate and real. Byzantine scholars preserved Homer and Hesiod as literary masterpieces rather than theological documents, studying them for their aesthetic and philosophical content while dismissing their claims to historical accuracy. This scholarly approach, while valuable for preserving the texts themselves, fundamentally altered their meaning and significance. The rise of Islam in the 7th century CE brought another wave of monotheistic criticism directed at pagan mythology. Islamic scholars, like their Christian counterparts, viewed the Greek gods as false idols that distracted humanity from worship of the one true God. The Arab conquests of former Byzantine territories introduced new populations who had no cultural connection to the Olympian pantheon, further marginalizing the gods' influence on human affairs. The medieval period witnessed the complete transformation of Greek mythology from living religion to literary heritage. The gods became characters in allegories and moral tales, their original context as descriptions of actual encounters lost beneath layers of Christian interpretation. Scholastic philosophers like Thomas Aquinas developed sophisticated theological systems that acknowledged the gods' existence while relegating them to the category of fallen angels or demonic entities. This framework preserved the gods' reality while stripping away their legitimate authority, creating a conception of divine power that was both diminished and distorted. The recovery of classical texts during the Renaissance brought renewed interest in Greek mythology, but approached it primarily through humanistic and artistic lenses. Renaissance scholars and artists celebrated the gods as symbols of human creativity and natural beauty, but they did not seriously consider the possibility that these figures might represent actual historical entities. The gods became subjects for painting and sculpture, sources of poetic inspiration, and allegories for natural phenomena, but they were not approached as potential contacts with non-human intelligences. The scientific revolution of the 17th and 18th centuries established new paradigms for understanding natural phenomena that left no room for divine intervention. The gods of Olympus, who had once been credited with controlling weather, earthquakes, and other natural forces, were replaced by mechanical explanations based on observation and mathematical analysis. This scientific approach achieved remarkable success in predicting and manipulating natural processes, but it also created a worldview that excluded the possibility of non-human intelligence operating within natural systems. The Enlightenment's emphasis on reason and empirical observation further distanced modern consciousness from mythological thinking. Voltaire, Diderot, and other philosophical leaders dismissed Greek mythology as evidence of humanity's pre-scientific ignorance, arguing that rational analysis could explain all phenomena without recourse to supernatural intervention. This rationalist approach established intellectual frameworks that would dominate Western thought for centuries, creating what might be called a mythological vacuum in human consciousness. The 19th century saw the development of comparative mythology and anthropology, which attempted to explain the gods as personifications of natural forces or psychological archetypes. Scholars like Max Muller and James Frazer developed theories suggesting that mythological figures represented primitive attempts to understand natural phenomena, while psychologists like Carl Jung interpreted them as expressions of unconscious mental processes. These approaches, while valuable for understanding the psychological and cultural dimensions of mythology, effectively closed off investigation into their possible basis in actual encounters with non-human entities. The 20th century brought new perspectives on mythology through the lens of space-age technology. Suddenly, the gods' ability to travel through the heavens, their advanced weapons, and their sophisticated technologies no longer seemed impossible but merely premature. This technological perspective generated alternative theories about the nature and origin of mythological traditions, theories that challenged fundamental assumptions about human history and our place in the cosmos. The work of researchers like Erich von Daniken and Zecharia Sitchin in the 1960s and 1970s introduced the possibility that ancient mythologies might preserve memories of contact with extraterrestrial visitors. These theories, while controversial and often dismissed by mainstream scholarship, opened new avenues for interpreting mythological narratives as potential historical documents rather than mere literary creations. The ancient astronaut hypothesis suggested that the gods' supernatural abilities might have been advanced technologies, their divine nature a product of primitive human inability to understand scientific principles. This alternative interpretation of mythology gained support from the growing awareness of the universe's vastness and the statistical likelihood of extraterrestrial intelligence. As humanity developed its own space travel capabilities and began searching for signs of intelligent life beyond Earth, the idea that ancient civilizations might have received visits from advanced beings became less fantastical and more plausible. The gods of Olympus, viewed through this lens, appeared not as supernatural entities, but as extraterrestrial visitors whose advanced technology was interpreted as divine power by human observers. The digital age has brought new tools for analyzing mythological traditions, allowing researchers to identify patterns and connections that previous generations might have missed. Computer databases containing thousands of mythological narratives from cultures worldwide reveal striking similarities in descriptions of divine beings, their technologies, and their interactions with humanity. These patterns suggest either common psychological archetypes or shared memories of actual encounters, raising fundamental questions about the nature of mythology and its relationship to historical reality. The gods' absence from contemporary experience has created a void in human consciousness that various modern phenomena have attempted to fill. UFO sightings, alien abduction accounts, and other paranormal experiences often display characteristics reminiscent of ancient divine encounters, suggesting that the human need for contact with non-human intelligence persists despite the official disappearance of the gods. This continuity of experience across millennia raises questions about whether the gods have truly vanished or merely changed their mode of interaction with humanity. The silence that has surrounded the gods for over 15 centuries may be as significant as their ancient presence. This absence forces us to confront fundamental questions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and humanity's place in the cosmos. If the gods were indeed extraterrestrial visitors, their departure might represent a natural phase in their relationship with human civilization, a withdrawal designed to allow humanity to develop its own technological and spiritual capabilities without direct interference. The mystery of the gods' disappearance thus opens doorways to questions that transcend conventional historical analysis. Whether they were supernatural entities, extraterrestrial visitors, or psychological projections, their absence has created space for new forms of spiritual and intellectual exploration. The silence of Olympus may be pregnant with possibilities, waiting for humanity to develop the wisdom and technology necessary to reestablish contact with the intelligence that once walked among our ancestors. Theories and hypotheses. The enigma of the Greek gods has generated a spectrum of interpretations that span from conventional academic analysis to speculative theories that challenge fundamental assumptions about human history and our place in the cosmos. Each approach offers a different lens through which to examine these ancient narratives, yet none provides a complete or entirely satisfactory explanation for the gods' apparent reality and influence in ancient Greek civilization. The classical anthropological explanation treats Greek mythology as a sophisticated symbolic system that encoded psychological and cultural truths rather than historical facts. According to this interpretation, the gods represent archetypal patterns embedded in human consciousness, universal themes that emerge across cultures as humanity grapples with fundamental questions about existence, mortality, and meaning. Zeus embodies the principle of authority and cosmic order, while Athena represents wisdom and strategic thinking. This approach finds support in the work of scholars like Joseph Campbell, who identified common mythological motifs across diverse cultures, suggesting that these stories arise from shared psychological structures rather than historical encounters. The anthropological framework gains credibility from its ability to explain the gods' psychological impact on ancient Greek culture. The myths provided templates for understanding human nature, social relationships, and moral behavior that proved remarkably durable across centuries. The gods' human-like characteristics, their jealousies, conflicts, and emotional responses made them accessible to ordinary people, while their supernatural powers maintained their authority as cosmic forces. This interpretation suggests that the gods' reality lay not in their physical existence, but in their psychological and cultural functions. However, the anthropological explanation faces significant challenges when confronted with the technical specificity of many mythological descriptions. The gods' technologies, their vehicles, and their weapons display characteristics that seem to anticipate modern scientific developments rather than reflecting the primitive worldview typically associated with ancient cultures. The detailed accounts of divine genetic manipulation, advanced materials, and energy projection systems suggest knowledge that extends beyond psychological symbolism into realms of technical possibility. The philosophical interpretation, traced back to ancient thinkers like Plato and developed through centuries of theological speculation, presents the gods as allegories for natural forces and cosmic principles. In this framework, Zeus represents electrical and atmospheric phenomena, Poseidon embodies geological and hydrological processes, while Demeter symbolizes agricultural and biological cycles. This approach treats mythology as an early form of natural philosophy, a primitive attempt to understand and categorize natural phenomena before the development of scientific methodology. This philosophical approach finds support in the gods' close association with specific natural domains and their apparent control over environmental processes. Ancient Greeks observed correlations between divine favor and natural abundance, between divine anger and environmental disasters, suggesting that the gods represented their understanding of natural causation. The elaborate ritual systems designed to maintain divine favor can be interpreted as early attempts at environmental management, efforts to influence natural processes through symbolic action. Yet, the philosophical interpretation struggles to account for the gods' apparent independence from natural processes, their ability to act in ways that transcend environmental limitations. The gods' space travel, their genetic manipulation capabilities, and their creation of artificial intelligences suggest powers that extend beyond natural forces into realms of technological possibility. The myths describe divine interventions that alter natural laws rather than simply working within them, indicating capabilities that transcend allegorical representation of natural phenomena. The alternative archaeological interpretation suggests that Greek mythology may preserve memories of contact with an advanced terrestrial civilization that possessed technologies far exceeding conventional historical timelines. This theory proposes that the gods were not extraterrestrial visitors but representatives of a sophisticated human culture that flourished before recorded history, possibly during the Ice Age or earlier periods when climatic conditions were different. The destruction of this civilization through natural catastrophe or warfare might have left only fragmentary memories preserved in mythological form. This interpretation gains support from archaeological discoveries that challenge conventional chronologies of human technological development. The Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a Roman-era shipwreck, demonstrates astronomical calculation capabilities that were supposedly not developed until the Renaissance. Similar anomalous artifacts from various periods suggest that ancient civilizations possessed knowledge and technologies that exceed conventional historical expectations. The gods' advanced capabilities might represent preserved memories of this lost technological heritage. The terrestrial advanced civilization theory also explains the gods' intimate familiarity with human psychology and culture, their ability to interact seamlessly with ancient Greek society. If the gods were indeed advanced humans rather than extraterrestrial visitors, their cultural compatibility with Greek civilization would be natural rather than remarkable. This interpretation avoids the complications of interstellar travel while maintaining the possibility that the gods possessed genuine technological capabilities. However, the terrestrial interpretation faces the challenge of explaining why such an advanced civilization would leave so few material traces while exerting such profound influence on human culture. The complete absence of recognizable technological artifacts from the proposed time period suggests either systematic destruction or deliberate concealment of evidence. The theory also struggles to explain the gods' apparent departure from human contact, which would be unnecessary if they were simply advanced humans rather than visitors from elsewhere. The extraterrestrial hypothesis, popularized by researchers like Erich von Daniken and Zacharias Sitchin, proposes that the Greek gods were advanced beings from other worlds who visited Earth in ancient times. According to this theory, the gods' supernatural abilities were actually advanced technologies that primitive humans could only describe in terms of divine power. Their flying vehicles became chariots of the gods, their energy weapons became thunderbolts, and their genetic manipulation capabilities became divine creation of heroes and monsters. This extraterrestrial interpretation finds support in the gods' apparent mastery of space travel, their ability to move instantly across vast distances, and their familiarity with cosmic geography. The myths describe divine journeys to distant realms that might represent other worlds or dimensions, while the gods' knowledge of astronomical cycles and celestial mechanics suggests understanding that exceeds ancient human capabilities. The consistent description of divine beings across cultures worldwide might indicate a global visitation program rather than independent mythological development. The extraterrestrial theory also explains the gods' eventual departure from human contact as a natural conclusion to their interaction with primitive human civilization. If the gods were indeed advanced extraterrestrial beings, their withdrawal might represent completion of their mission, whatever that might have been. The timing of their departure, coinciding with the development of human philosophical and technological capabilities, suggests that their presence might have been designed to guide human evolution to a point where direct intervention was no longer necessary. Nevertheless, the extraterrestrial hypothesis faces the challenge of explaining why advanced beings capable of interstellar travel would interact so intimately with primitive human cultures while leaving no unambiguous physical evidence of their presence. The absence of recognizable technological artifacts or clear documentation of their activities suggests either systematic concealment or fundamental misunderstanding of their true nature. The theory also requires accepting that multiple extraterrestrial civilizations were simultaneously active on Earth, given the diversity of divine beings described in different mythological traditions. The interdimensional interpretation represents a more speculative approach that draws on modern physics and consciousness research to propose that the gods existed in parallel dimensions or alternate realities that occasionally intersected with human experience. This theory suggests that the gods' ability to appear and disappear, their mastery of forces beyond human understanding, and their apparent independence from physical limitations might reflect their existence in dimensions with different physical laws or properties. The interdimensional framework finds support in quantum mechanical theories about parallel universes and the possibility of multiple realities existing simultaneously. If consciousness can access information or influence events across dimensional boundaries, the gods' apparent omniscience and their ability to intervene in human affairs might represent natural capabilities rather than supernatural powers. The mythological descriptions of divine realms with different temporal and spatial properties align with theoretical physics concepts about alternate dimensions. This interpretation also explains the gods' intimate knowledge of human psychology and their ability to influence human consciousness directly. If the gods existed in dimensions where thought and reality were more closely connected, their psychological influence might represent natural communication across dimensional boundaries rather than supernatural intervention. The emphasis on ritual and symbolic action in divine worship might reflect techniques for facilitating interdimensional contact. However, the interdimensional theory remains highly speculative and difficult to verify through conventional means. The absence of clear physical evidence for dimensional travel or interdimensional entities leaves the theory dependent on theoretical possibilities rather than demonstrable facts. The interpretation also requires accepting consciousness models that extend beyond current scientific understanding, making it difficult to distinguish from purely imaginative speculation. The psychological projection theory, developed through the work of Carl Jung and other depth psychologists, proposes that the gods represent externalized aspects of human consciousness, archetypal patterns that emerge from the collective unconscious. According to this interpretation, the gods' apparent reality reflects their psychological authenticity rather than their physical existence. The myths describe internal psychological processes projected onto external cosmic dramas, making the gods real as psychological entities while remaining fictional as historical figures. This psychological approach finds support in the gods' close correlation with human emotional and behavioral patterns, their representation of fundamental psychological conflicts and developmental stages. The Greek pantheon maps remarkably well onto psychological theories about personality structure and unconscious motivation, suggesting that the gods might represent natural psychological categories rather than external entities. The therapeutic value of mythological narratives, their ability to provide insight into human nature and psychological healing, demonstrates their psychological authenticity. The psychological interpretation also explains the gods' continuing influence on human culture despite their apparent historical absence. If the gods represent archetypal patterns embedded in human consciousness, their mythological expressions would remain relevant across cultures and time periods. The recurring appearance of godlike figures in modern UFO encounters and paranormal experiences might reflect the continued projection of these archetypal patterns rather than encounters with external entities. Yet, the psychological explanation struggles to account for the apparent external reality of divine interventions described in ancient sources. The gods' ability to affect physical reality, their interaction with multiple witnesses simultaneously, and their apparent independence from human psychological states suggest existence beyond purely internal psychological processes. The theory also fails to explain why psychological projections would display such consistent technological characteristics across different cultures and time periods. The holographic reality theory represents perhaps the most radical reinterpretation of divine mythology, suggesting that the gods might represent information patterns or consciousness constructs existing within a simulated or holographic universe. This interpretation draws on theoretical physics concepts about reality as information processing and the possibility that consciousness might be fundamental to cosmic structure. The gods' apparent mastery of physical laws and their ability to alter reality might reflect their role as programming entities within a cosmic information system. This framework finds support in the gods' apparent ability to transcend normal physical limitations while maintaining consistent logical patterns in their behavior. If reality operates according to informational rather than purely physical principles, the gods' supernatural abilities might represent natural capabilities within an information-based cosmos. The mythological emphasis on divine knowledge and wisdom might reflect their role as information processors or consciousness administrators within cosmic systems. The holographic interpretation also explains the gods' intimate connection with human consciousness and their ability to influence human experience directly. If consciousness represents a fundamental aspect of cosmic information processing, the gods' psychological impact might reflect their role in consciousness development and evolution. The eventual disappearance of direct divine contact might represent humanity's graduation to independent consciousness processing, no longer requiring direct divine intervention. However, the holographic theory remains highly speculative and difficult to verify through conventional means. The absence of clear evidence for simulated reality or holographic cosmic structure leaves the theory dependent on theoretical possibilities that extend far beyond current scientific understanding. The interpretation also requires accepting consciousness models that fundamentally challenge materialist assumptions about the nature of reality. The convergence of these various interpretations suggests that the Greek gods may represent a phenomenon too complex for any single theoretical framework to explain completely. Perhaps their reality encompasses multiple dimensions: psychological, technological, dimensional, and informational, that cannot be separated into discrete categories. The gods' ultimate nature may require expanding our understanding of consciousness, reality, and possibility itself, opening doorways to questions that transcend conventional academic analysis. Archaeological evidence and technological anomalies. The archaeological record of ancient Greece contains a fascinating array of artifacts and structures that, when examined through the lens of the ancient astronaut hypothesis, take on new significance and raise profound questions about the technological capabilities of classical civilization. These material remains, while subject to conventional archaeological interpretation, display characteristics that seem to anticipate modern scientific developments in ways that challenge our understanding of ancient knowledge and capability. The Antikythera mechanism, discovered in 1901 by sponge divers in the Aegean Sea, represents perhaps the most dramatic example of anachronistic technology in the archaeological record. This bronze device, dating to approximately 100 BCE, contains a complex arrangement of gears and dials that functioned as an astronomical calculator of remarkable sophistication. The mechanism could predict the positions of the sun, moon, and planets, calculate eclipse dates, and track the four-year cycle of the Olympic Games. Its complexity rivals that of clockwork mechanisms not developed in Europe until the 14th century CE. The discovery of the Antikythera mechanism forced a fundamental revision of assumptions about ancient Greek technological capabilities. X-ray analysis revealed that the device contained at least 82 bronze gears arranged in a differential gear system that was not rediscovered until the Renaissance. The precision of the gear cutting and the sophistication of the mathematical calculations encoded in the mechanism suggest a level of technological development that exceeds conventional expectations for ancient civilizations. The mechanism's creators demonstrated advanced understanding of astronomical cycles and planetary motion that would not be rediscovered until the work of Kepler and Newton. The device tracked the complex elliptical orbit of the Moon with remarkable accuracy, incorporating corrections for lunar motion that required sophisticated mathematical analysis. This level of astronomical knowledge suggests access to observational data and theoretical frameworks that extend beyond the capabilities typically attributed to ancient Greek science. The implications of the Antikythera mechanism extend beyond its immediate technological sophistication to raise questions about the knowledge systems that produced it. If ancient Greeks possessed the mathematical and engineering capabilities necessary to create such devices, what other technologies might they have developed that have not survived in the archaeological record? The mechanism's existence suggests that conventional timelines for technological development may be incomplete or inaccurate. Greek temple architecture displays acoustic and geometric properties that suggest advanced understanding of sound manipulation and mathematical relationships. The Theater of Epidaurus, built in the 4th century BCE, demonstrates acoustic engineering that allows whispers from the stage to be heard clearly throughout a 14,000-seat amphitheater. This acoustic perfection results from precise mathematical calculations governing the theater's proportions and the placement of reflective surfaces. The acoustic properties of Greek temples extend beyond mere architectural achievement to suggest possible technological applications. The Temple of Apollo at Delphi, site of the famous oracle, contains acoustic anomalies that might have enhanced the prophetic experience through sound manipulation. The temple's inner chamber, where the Pythia delivered her prophecies, displays resonance characteristics that could amplify and distort human speech in ways that would seem supernatural to ancient observers. Modern acoustic analysis of Greek temples has revealed sophisticated understanding of frequency manipulation and sound focusing that anticipates modern audio engineering principles. The temple's builders demonstrated knowledge of how sound waves interact with architectural surfaces, creating spaces that could concentrate and direct acoustic energy with remarkable precision. This acoustic mastery suggests technical knowledge that exceeds conventional expectations for ancient architectural capabilities. The geometric proportions of Greek temples follow mathematical relationships that were supposedly not discovered until the Renaissance. The Parthenon incorporates the golden ratio and other mathematical constants in its design, creating visual harmony that reflects deep understanding of geometric principles. The building's subtle curves and proportional relationships demonstrate mathematical sophistication that challenges assumptions about ancient Greek knowledge. Greek pottery and metalwork display artistic techniques that suggest advanced understanding of material science and manufacturing processes. The Lycurgus cup, a Roman glass vessel with Greek artistic influence, changes color dramatically when illuminated from different angles due to the incorporation of gold and silver nanoparticles in the glass matrix. This nanotechnology effect was achieved through manufacturing processes that were not rediscovered until the 20th century. The technical analysis of Greek metalworking reveals sophisticated understanding of alloy composition and heat treatment that anticipates modern metallurgical science. Greek bronze weapons and tools demonstrate precise control of metal properties through careful manipulation of copper and tin ratios. The consistent quality of Greek metalwork across different regions suggests standardized manufacturing processes that required advanced technical knowledge. Greek artistic representations of the gods contain details that, when interpreted through the ancient astronaut hypothesis, suggest technological rather than supernatural capabilities. Vase paintings depicting divine figures often show them surrounded by geometric patterns or symbols that might represent technological interfaces or control systems. The gods' clothing and accessories display designs that could be interpreted as technological devices rather than mere artistic embellishment. The famous red figure pottery of Athens contains numerous depictions of divine beings engaged in activities that might represent technological operations rather than mythological events. Zeus wielding thunderbolts could be interpreted as using energy weapons, while Hephaestus working at his forge might represent advanced manufacturing processes. The artistic emphasis on divine tools and devices suggests that the gods' technological capabilities were considered central to their identity and power. Archaeological investigations of Greek sacred sites have revealed construction techniques that seem to exceed the capabilities of conventional ancient technology. The foundation stones of the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, for example, display precision cutting and fitting that rivals modern masonry techniques. The blocks show no tool marks or evidence of conventional cutting methods, suggesting manufacturing processes that remain unexplained. The construction of Greek temples required moving and positioning massive stone blocks with tolerances measured in millimeters. The techniques used to achieve this precision remain mysterious, as conventional archaeological interpretations rely on simple tools and manual labor that seem inadequate for the observed results. The possibility that advanced technologies were employed in temple construction cannot be definitively ruled out based on the archaeological evidence. Underground chambers and tunnels discovered beneath Greek temples display engineering sophistication that suggests advanced understanding of structural mechanics and environmental control. The oracle chamber at Delphi, for example, contains ventilation systems and acoustic features that create specific environmental conditions conducive to altered states of consciousness. These engineering features suggest that the temples were designed as technological systems rather than simple religious structures. The water management systems of ancient Greek cities demonstrate hydraulic engineering capabilities that anticipate modern municipal infrastructure. The Tunnel of Eupalinos on the island of Samos, built in the 6th century BCE, required precise surveying and excavation techniques to create a kilometer-long tunnel through solid rock. The tunnel's construction demanded mathematical calculations and engineering precision that seemed to exceed conventional expectations for ancient capabilities. Greek astronomical observation sites contain features that suggest advanced understanding of celestial mechanics and observation techniques. The Tower of the Winds in Athens functions as a sophisticated weather monitoring station that tracked wind patterns and atmospheric conditions with remarkable precision. The structure's design incorporates meteorological knowledge that was supposedly not developed until the modern era. The archaeological record also reveals gaps and anomalies that might indicate the deliberate removal or concealment of evidence. Many Greek temples show signs of systematic destruction during the Christian period, with specific targeting of areas that might have contained technological devices or inscriptions. The absence of certain types of artifacts that might be expected based on mythological descriptions suggests either systematic removal or the use of materials that have not survived in the archaeological record. The discovery of ancient Greek texts describing technological devices that have not been found in the archaeological record raises questions about the completeness of our material evidence. Hero of Alexandria's writings describes steam engines, automated doors, and other mechanical devices that demonstrate advanced engineering knowledge. The absence of these devices in the archaeological record might indicate that they were constructed from materials that have not survived or that they were systematically removed from the historical record. Modern scientific analysis of Greek archaeological sites using ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, and other advanced techniques has revealed subsurface anomalies that suggest the presence of undiscovered structures or technological features. These investigations have identified geometric patterns and metallic signatures that do not conform to conventional archaeological expectations, raising questions about what might still be hidden beneath known sites. The continuing discovery of Greek technological artifacts in underwater archaeological sites suggests that significant portions of the ancient technological record may be submerged or otherwise inaccessible. The Antikythera mechanism was discovered in a shipwreck, indicating that similar devices might be preserved in other underwater sites. The systematic exploration of ancient Greek harbor areas and trade routes might reveal additional technological evidence that challenges conventional historical timelines. The archaeological evidence from ancient Greece thus presents a complex picture that supports multiple interpretations while definitively proving none. The material remains demonstrate technological capabilities that exceed conventional expectations for ancient civilizations, but they do not provide unambiguous evidence for extraterrestrial intervention or advanced lost civilizations. The artifacts and structures remain silent about their ultimate origins and purposes, leaving interpretation dependent on theoretical frameworks that extend beyond the physical evidence itself. The archaeological record's ambiguity may be its most significant characteristic, suggesting that the truth about ancient Greek technological capabilities lies at the intersection of multiple possibilities. The evidence supports enhanced human achievement, preserved knowledge from earlier civilizations, extraterrestrial intervention, and other explanations without definitively confirming any single theory. This ambiguity may reflect the limits of archaeological methodology rather than the absence of extraordinary phenomena in ancient Greek civilization. Mystical traditions and esoteric interpretations. Beyond the realm of conventional archaeological and historical analysis lies a rich tradition of mystical and esoteric interpretations of Greek mythology that offers alternative perspectives on the nature and origin of the Olympic gods. These traditions, while often dismissed by mainstream scholarship, preserve ancient wisdom teachings and alternative frameworks for understanding divine reality that may illuminate aspects of the Greek religious experience that escape purely rational analysis. The Hermetic tradition, which emerged in the late Hellenistic period, presents the Greek gods as initiatory symbols representing stages of spiritual development and cosmic consciousness. According to Hermetic teaching, the myths encode instructions for achieving union with divine intelligence through systematic spiritual practice. The gods' adventures and transformations represent psychological and spiritual processes that the initiate must undergo to achieve gnosis, or direct knowledge of ultimate reality. The Hermetic interpretation of Zeus as the supreme consciousness principle suggests that the king of the gods represents the highest level of cosmic awareness accessible to human consciousness. His various manifestations and relationships with other deities map the structure of reality itself, from the most abstract metaphysical principles to the concrete operations of natural law. This framework treats mythology as a sophisticated system of spiritual instruction disguised as popular entertainment. The Hermetic tradition also emphasizes the technological aspects of divine power, interpreting the gods' magical abilities as advanced applications of natural law rather than supernatural interventions. The gods' mastery of matter and energy represents knowledge of cosmic principles that transcend ordinary human understanding but remain fundamentally rational and systematic. This interpretation suggests that the gods were teachers of advanced science disguised as religious figures. The Orphic Mysteries, which claim to preserve the original teachings of the legendary musician Orpheus, presented the gods as cosmic principles operating within a grand cycle of creation and destruction. The Orphic cosmogony describes multiple worlds and dimensions where different aspects of divine consciousness manifest according to natural laws. This multidimensional cosmology anticipates modern theories about parallel universes and alternate realities. The Orphic interpretation of divine genealogy presents the gods as evolutionary stages in the development of cosmic consciousness. The succession of divine generations represents the progressive manifestation of intelligence throughout the cosmos, from the primordial unity of chaos to the structured complexity of the Olympian pantheon. This evolutionary framework suggests that the gods represent natural stages in the development of consciousness rather than arbitrary supernatural beings. The Orphic emphasis on divine dismemberment and reconstitution, particularly in the myth of Dionysus, has been interpreted as describing quantum mechanical processes where reality dissolves into component elements before reassembling in new configurations. This interpretation suggests that the ancients possessed intuitive understanding of quantum physics disguised as religious mythology. The Eleusinian Mysteries, centered on the story of Demeter and Persephone, provided initiates with direct experience of death and rebirth that transformed their understanding of consciousness and reality. The mystery rituals created altered states of consciousness that allowed participants to perceive reality from divine perspectives, suggesting that the gods were accessible through consciousness expansion rather than external worship. The Eleusinian experience was described by initiates as revelatory contact with divine intelligence that provided knowledge about the nature of existence and the afterlife. This direct gnosis suggests that the gods were not merely mythological figures but actual intelligence entities that could be contacted through appropriate techniques. The persistence of mystery traditions across centuries indicates that these contacts were reproducible and reliable. The philosophical schools of late antiquity, particularly the Neoplatonists, developed sophisticated theories about divine hierarchy and cosmic structure that treated the gods as real entities operating within a complex metaphysical system. Plotinus and his followers described the gods as emanations of the One, intermediate principles that mediated between absolute unity and material multiplicity. This framework presented the gods as necessary components of cosmic structure rather than optional supernatural additions. The Neoplatonic understanding of divine theurgy, or God-working, provided practical techniques for establishing contact with divine intelligence through ritual action and contemplative practice. The theurgists claimed to achieve direct communication with the gods through properly performed ceremonies that created resonance between human consciousness and divine intelligence. This magical practice suggests that the gods were understood as accessible through technological rather than merely devotional means. The alchemical tradition, which emerged from the fusion of Greek philosophy with Egyptian and Islamic mysticism, interpreted the gods as chemical and metallurgical principles operating within both material and spiritual realms. The gods' transformations and interactions represented actual processes of material transformation that could be replicated through laboratory work. This alchemical framework treated mythology as encoded instruction for advanced chemistry and physics. The alchemical interpretation of divine genealogy presents the gods as stages in the transformation of matter and consciousness from crude material to refined spiritual essence. The gods' relationships and conflicts represent the interactions between different chemical and spiritual principles that must be balanced and harmonized to achieve the great work of transformation. This framework suggests that the gods were teachers of advanced material science disguised as religious figures. The Gnostic traditions, which flourished in the early Christian period, presented the Greek gods as archons or cosmic rulers operating within a complex hierarchy of spiritual beings. The Gnostic cosmology described multiple levels of reality where different types of intelligence operated according to different natural laws. The gods represented administrative entities within this cosmic system rather than ultimate spiritual authorities. The Gnostic understanding of divine technology emphasized the gods' ability to manipulate matter and consciousness through knowledge of cosmic principles. The gods' apparent magical powers represented advanced applications of natural law that could be learned and practiced by human beings who achieved the appropriate level of spiritual development. This interpretation suggests that the gods were advanced beings who taught cosmic technology to selected human initiates. The medieval magical traditions preserved fragments of ancient divine contact techniques through grimoires and magical texts that claimed to provide practical instructions for communicating with the gods. These texts, while often corrupted through centuries of transmission, contain detailed procedures for establishing contact with divine intelligence through ritual action and consciousness manipulation. The persistence of these traditions suggests that they preserved genuine techniques for accessing non-ordinary states of consciousness. The Renaissance revival of Hermetic and Neoplatonic traditions brought renewed interest in practical divine contact methods. Scholars like Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola developed sophisticated theoretical frameworks for understanding divine communication and practical techniques for achieving direct contact with divine intelligence. Their work suggests that the gods were understood as accessible through intellectual and spiritual development rather than mere faith or worship. The modern revival of esoteric traditions has produced new interpretations of Greek mythology that incorporate contemporary understanding of consciousness, quantum physics, and extraterrestrial possibilities. These modern esoteric approaches treat the gods as archetypal patterns that can be accessed through consciousness expansion techniques, dimensional travel, or communication with advanced extraterrestrial civilizations. The contemporary channeling movement claims to have re-established direct communication with the Olympic gods through mediumistic techniques that allow human consciousness to serve as a conduit for divine communication. These modern oracles report receiving information from Zeus, Athena, and other traditional deities who claim to have maintained their existence in higher dimensions while awaiting humanity's spiritual development to a level where direct communication becomes possible again. The UFO contact movement has interpreted many classical divine encounters as misunderstood extraterrestrial visitations, suggesting that the gods were advanced beings from other worlds who established contact with ancient human civilizations. This interpretation treats the esoteric traditions as preserved memories of actual technological contact disguised as religious experience. The consciousness research movement has developed techniques for accessing expanded states of awareness that sometimes produce contact with entities that identify themselves as the classical gods. These experiences, while subjective and difficult to verify, suggest that the gods may exist as aspects of consciousness that can be accessed through appropriate techniques rather than historical entities that have disappeared from reality. The psychedelic research renaissance has revealed that consciousness-altering substances can produce encounters with entities that display characteristics similar to the classical gods. These experiences suggest that the gods may represent natural features of consciousness that become accessible through altered states rather than external entities that exist independently of human awareness. The persistence of divine contact experiences across cultures and centuries suggests that the gods represent something more fundamental than mere mythological constructs. Whether they exist as psychological archetypes, dimensional entities, extraterrestrial visitors, or aspects of cosmic consciousness, their continued relevance to human spiritual experience indicates that they touch upon real features of reality that transcend conventional religious and scientific categories. The esoteric traditions ultimately suggest that the question of the gods' historical existence may be less important than their continued accessibility through consciousness expansion and spiritual development. If the gods represent aspects of cosmic intelligence that can be contacted through appropriate techniques, their mythological expressions may serve as instruction manuals for achieving these contacts rather than historical records of past events. The mystical understanding of the gods thus offers a bridge between ancient wisdom and contemporary spiritual exploration, suggesting that the classical deities remain available to human consciousness through practices that transcend conventional religious worship. The gods' apparent departure from historical reality may represent not their disappearance but humanity's temporary loss of the knowledge and techniques necessary for maintaining contact with cosmic intelligence. Conclusion and reflection. The exploration of Greek mythology through the lens of the ancient astronaut hypothesis reveals a complex tapestry of possibilities that challenges conventional understanding of ancient history, human consciousness, and our place in the cosmos. The gods of Olympus, whether interpreted as psychological archetypes, technological memories, or actual extraterrestrial visitors, represent phenomena that transcend simple categorization and demand expanded frameworks for understanding the relationship between mythology and reality. The evidence we have examined spans multiple domains of inquiry, from archaeological artifacts that display anachronistic technological sophistication to mystical traditions that preserve techniques for achieving direct contact with divine intelligence. The Antikythera mechanism demonstrates that ancient Greek civilization possessed mathematical and engineering capabilities that exceed conventional historical expectations, while the acoustic properties of Greek temples suggest advanced understanding of sound manipulation and environmental control. The mythological narratives themselves contain descriptions of divine technologies and capabilities that seem to anticipate modern scientific developments in ways that cannot be easily dismissed as coincidental. The gods' mastery of flight, their energy weapons, their genetic manipulation abilities, and their creation of artificial intelligence all find parallels in contemporary technological achievements. These parallels suggest either remarkable intuitive foresight on the part of ancient storytellers or preserved memories of actual technological encounters. The gradual disappearance of the gods from human experience during the late imperial period coincides with the rise of philosophical and religious systems that emphasize transcendence over immanence, abstract principle over concrete presence. This transformation may represent natural cultural evolution, systematic suppression of alternative religious traditions, or the conclusion of a contact program that had achieved its intended purposes. The esoteric traditions that have preserved techniques for achieving direct contact with divine intelligence suggest that the gods' apparent absence from contemporary experience may reflect changes in human consciousness rather than the gods' actual disappearance. If the gods exist as aspects of cosmic intelligence accessible through expanded awareness, their mythological expressions may serve as instruction manuals for re-establishing contact rather than historical records of concluded events. The archaeological evidence remains tantalizingly incomplete, providing suggestive anomalies without definitive proof of extraordinary phenomena. The technological sophistication of artifacts like the Antikythera mechanism indicates that ancient civilizations possessed capabilities that exceed conventional expectations, but these discoveries do not conclusively demonstrate extraterrestrial intervention or advanced lost civilizations. The evidence supports multiple interpretations while definitively proving none. The persistence of divine contact experiences across cultures and centuries suggests that the gods represent something more fundamental than mere mythological constructs. Whether they exist as psychological archetypes, dimensional entities, extraterrestrial visitors, or aspects of cosmic consciousness, their continued relevance to human spiritual experience indicates that they touch upon real features of reality that transcend conventional religious and scientific categories. The question of whether the gods were extraterrestrial visitors ultimately depends on our willingness to expand our conception of what is possible. If consciousness is more fundamental than matter, if reality operates according to informational rather than purely physical principles, if the universe contains intelligence that transcends terrestrial biology, then the gods' apparent supernatural abilities may reflect natural capabilities within expanded frameworks of understanding. The ancient astronaut hypothesis challenges us to reconsider basic assumptions about human history, technological development, and the nature of consciousness itself. If advanced civilizations have been visiting Earth for millennia, if humanity has been receiving guidance from cosmic intelligence, if our mythological traditions preserve memories of actual contact events, then our understanding of human origins and destiny requires fundamental revision. The implications of taking the ancient astronaut hypothesis seriously extend beyond academic curiosity to encompass practical questions about humanity's current situation and future development. If the gods were indeed extraterrestrial visitors, their apparent withdrawal from direct contact might represent a natural phase in their relationship with human civilization, a period of independent development before resumed contact becomes appropriate. The silence that has surrounded the gods for over 15 centuries may be pregnant with possibilities, waiting for humanity to develop the wisdom and technology necessary to re-establish contact with cosmic intelligence. The myths may serve as both historical records and future instruction manuals, preserving knowledge about contact protocols and consciousness expansion techniques that will become relevant as humanity develops its own space travel capabilities. The gods' legacy continues to influence human culture and consciousness in ways that transcend their historical period. The archetypal patterns they represent, the technologies they demonstrated, and the questions they raised about the nature of intelligence and reality remain relevant to contemporary human experience. Whether they were extraterrestrial visitors, advanced terrestrial beings, or aspects of cosmic consciousness, their impact on human development appears to be permanent and transformative. The mystery of the gods ultimately reflects the mystery of consciousness itself. The question of whether divine intelligence exists independently of human awareness, whether consciousness can transcend biological limitations, whether reality contains levels of intelligence that operate according to different natural laws, remains open to investigation and speculation. The gods' apparent reality to ancient Greek civilization suggests that these questions have practical as well as theoretical significance. The exploration of Greek mythology through the ancient astronaut hypothesis thus serves not only to reinterpret ancient history, but to expand our understanding of current possibilities. If the gods were real in any sense, their reality may be accessible to contemporary human consciousness through appropriate techniques and development. The myths may preserve not only memories of past contact but instructions for future reunion with cosmic intelligence. The ancient Greeks' relationship with their gods, whether interpreted as psychological projection, technological memory, or actual contact experience, demonstrates humanity's capacity to perceive and interact with forms of intelligence that transcend ordinary awareness. This capacity may represent our most distinctive characteristic as a species, our unique ability to transcend biological limitations through consciousness expansion and technological development. The gods of Olympus, in all their mystery and complexity, remain relevant to contemporary human experience as symbols of possibility, as challenges to conventional understanding, and as reminders that reality may be far stranger and more wonderful than our current paradigms suggest. Whether they were visitors from the stars, advanced terrestrial beings, or aspects of cosmic consciousness, their legacy continues to inspire questions about the nature of intelligence, the possibilities of consciousness, and humanity's place in the greater cosmos. The question of whether Zeus descended from another planet rather than Mount Olympus may never be definitively answered, but the exploration of this possibility opens doorways to understanding that transcend the specific historical question. In seeking to understand the gods, we ultimately seek to understand ourselves, our origins, our capabilities, and our destiny. The ancient astronaut hypothesis, whatever its ultimate validity, serves as a catalyst for expanding human consciousness and exploring the full range of possibilities that existence may contain. The gods' greatest gift to humanity may be not their historical reality, but their continuing capacity to inspire wonder, to challenge assumptions, and to suggest that reality contains dimensions of intelligence and possibility that exceed our current understanding. In this sense, the gods remain eternally present, waiting in the realm of possibility for humanity to develop the wisdom and capability necessary to recognize and interact with cosmic intelligence in whatever form it may take.